Selenium WebDriver Basics. What is Selenium WebDriver? Selenium WebDriver is a tool for automating web application testing. It drives the browser directly using browser's native support for automation. Name a few browsers supported by Selenium WebDriver: Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Edge, Safari, Opera, etc. What are the advantages of Selenium WebDriver over Selenium RC? WebDriver interacts directly with the browser without needing separate server like RC. WebDriver has more object-oriented API. WebDriver supports more programming languages. Explain the difference between find element and find elements methods in WebDriver. Find element returns single web element matching the specified criteria. Find elements returns list of web elements matching the specified criteria. How can you launch browser using WebDriver? Instantiate a WebDriver object with a desired browser driver. What is WebDriver wait in Selenium? WebDriver wait is used to wait for a certain condition to occur before proceeding with the execution. It can wait for elements to be clickable, visible, etc. Explain implicit wait in Selenium WebDriver. Implicit wait sets global wait timeout for WebDriver instance. It tells WebDriver to wait for a certain amount of time before throwing no such element exception. Driver.manage.timeout.implicit wait 10 comma time unit dot in seconds. How can you perform double click action using WebDriver? Use the actions class to perform double click action. How do you handle keyboard and mouse events in WebDriver? Use actions class for keyboard and mouse interactions like send keys, click, double click, context click. What are the different types of waits available in WebDriver? Implicit, explicit, fluent wait. Locators in Selenium WebDriver. What are the locators in Selenium WebDriver? ID, name, class name, tag name, link text, partial link text, CSS selector, XPath. When would you use CSS selector over XPath? CSS selectors are faster and preferred for performance. XPath is more powerful and flexible in locating complex elements. How do you find element using XPath in WebDriver? By using XPath method to find elements using XPath, like web element equal to driver dot find element and writing XPath syntax. What is the difference between absolute XPath and relative XPath? Absolute XPath starts from root node of the document. Relative XPath starts from any node in the middle of the document. How do you handle dynamic elements in Selenium WebDriver? Using dynamic XPath or CSS selectors that can handle changing the attributes or positions. Working with web elements. How do you perform drag and drop using WebDriver? Use actions class for drag and drop operations like giving a source element and target element and using perform method by using actions class for drag and drop operations. How do you simulate pressing enter key using WebDriver? Use keys class to send special keys like enter. How do you check if an element is present on the web page using WebDriver? Use find elements method and check if the list of is empty or not. How do you get attribute of an element using WebDriver? Use get attribute method to retrieve the value of an element. How do you get the text of an element using WebDriver? Use get text method to retrieve the visible text of an element. Coming to handling frames and windows. How do you handle frames in WebDriver? Use switch to dot frame method to switch to a frame. How do you handle multiple windows in a WebDriver? Like you using window handles window handle by using for multiple windows we use switch window handles like to switch between multiple windows. How do you close browser window using WebDriver? Use close method to close the current window like driver.close method. How do you maximize browser window using WebDriver? Use maximize method to maximize the browser window. How do you navigate back and forward in WebDriver? Use the navigate.back and navigate.forward method. Driver.navigate back and navigate.forward. How do you handle alerts in WebDriver? By using alert interface to handle JavaScript alerts. How do you handle file uploads using WebDriver? Like using send keys method. for handling file uploads on input for using syndicates method on input type equal to file element. How do you handle authentication pop-ups in WebDriver? Use Selenium WebDriver with the browser profiles or use AutoIT or Robot class to handle Windows-based authentication pop-ups. How do you handle SSL certificate errors in WebDriver? Use the desired capabilities to classes to accept SSL certificates. How do you handle browser notifications in WebDriver? Use Chrome options or Firefox options to disable notifications. Working with the TestNG and JUnit. What is TestNG? TestNG is like a testing a framework inspired by JUnit and a new it provides additional features like annotations, grouping, sequencing, and parameterization, etc. How do you execute tests in TestNG? Create test class with test annotation. Execute them using TestNG XML or Maven. What are the different annotations used in TestNG? @test, @before shoot, @after shoot, before test, after test, before class, after class, before method, after method, etc. How do you group tests in TestNG? Using test groups equal to group 1, comma group 2 annotation to group test. How do you parameterize test in TestNG? Using parameters annotation and define parameters in TestNG XML. How do you handle dependencies in TestNG? Using dependency method or dependence on group attribute in test annotation. How do you generate test reports in TestNG? Using default HTML reports generated by TestNG or integrated with the tools like extend reports or reporting for enhanced reporting. What is JUnit? JUnit is a Java testing framework used for unit testing. What are the annotations used in JUnit? @test, before, after, before class, after class, before all, after all. Difference between TestNG and JUnit. TestNG supports parameterization, grouping, sequencing, etc. Whereas JUnit is a more focused on unit testing. TestNG has more annotations and features compared to JUnit. What is page object model class? Page object model means like it is a design pattern to create an object repository for web UI elements. Each web page is represented as Java class. What are the advantages of using page object model? Like code reusability, code maintainability, reduced code duplication, improved readability. How do you implement page object model in Selenium WebDriver? Like create separate class for each web page, define web page elements and methods to interact with those elements in a class. How do you handle dynamic elements in page object model? Use dynamic XPath or CSS selectors in page object methods. Test automation framework. What is test automation framework? A framework is a set of guidelines or rules used for creating and designing test cases. Types of test automation frameworks: data driven framework, keyword driven framework, modular framework, hybrid framework. And what is data driven testing framework in Selenium WebDriver? Data driven testing is a technique where test data is separated from test scripts. Data is provided from external files like Excel, CSV, or databases. How do you implement data driven testing? Using TestNG. Use other data provider annotations to supply test data or other test methods. What is keyword driven testing in Selenium WebDriver? Keyword driven testing is a technique where test steps are written in a tabular format using keywords. Each keyword represents an action or a verification. Explain hybrid framework in Selenium WebDriver. Hybrid framework combines the best feature of different frameworks like data driven or keyword driven or page object model to leverage their strengths. Stay tuned for more updates